Thanks for sticking around, everyone. My name is Chris Kuntz. I'm with a company called Augmented. And what I want to talk about is actually the IA or AI part of this logo here. So I was actually excited to see Ori and Ramesh talk earlier about intelligent augmentation or intelligence augmentation. We call it at Augmented augmented intelligence, but it's really the marriage of artificial intelligence and augmented reality. And in our space, we're using that to define what we're calling the future of the worker, the rise of the augmented worker. And we're talking about industrial enterprise workers. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about the background of our team at Augmented. We have a 30-year history in bringing software to the manufacturing and industrial sector, dating back to 1988 or 89. Phil Huber, one of our co-founders, co-founded a company called Wonderware Software, which was the first human-machine interface software to help humans control factory equipment. It's still being used today in 60 to 70% of the factories around the world. So it was a pioneer in HMI software. In the mid-2000s, Russ Fidel, one of Augmented's other co-founders, co-founded a company called Lighthammer Software that was sold to SAP, and it revolutionized manufacturing intelligence. And then as a team, we came together in 2008 to start a company called ThingWorx, which was a pioneer in the industrial Internet of Things space. That company was sold to PTC. And it's nice to see PTC's done some fantastic stuff with the ThingWorx platform. And so when we got done with ThingWorx and transitioned that over to PTC, we looked at what's next, and we realized a couple things. We realized that augmented reality as adoption in the enterprise and industrial sector just wasn't happening. And it wasn't happening because the impact didn't exist on the actual human worker. And secondly, the technology was really not accessible to the small and mid-sized companies. And so I was talking about the human worker and the focus of that at Augmented. And here I'm talking about artificial intelligence, right? So a lot of people, when you hear the term artificial intelligence, you think robots and automation, you think replacing human jobs and human workers. What I want to talk about is a different application of that and talk about how it can be used to augment the human worker. And if you look at what the human worker, the frontline worker in manufacturing and in industry today, these are skilled technicians, these are assembly workers, these are field service technicians that are out in the field using their hands to do work. These jobs are not going to be replaced by robots anytime soon, yet they're oftentimes underserved when it comes to technology to help them do their job better. And when we looked at the problem with the human worker in the manufacturing and industrial space, we talked to a lot of companies, and the big thing that kept coming up was the skills gap. So there's a massive retiring workforce. The baby boomer generation is retiring at dramatic rates every year. They're leaving behind, or they're taking with them a lot of tribal knowledge that isn't captured in a digital format. It's not accessible as a corporate shared asset. That knowledge is not accessible to walking out the door. And at the same time, there's an emerging workforce coming in that's not skilled. They might have the attitude and the aptitude, but they don't have the skills to perform those jobs at the same skill level. And there was recently a report from the Manufacturing Institute that came out. This year alone, $26.2 billion will be spent by manufacturing companies on upskilling and training their workforces to both attract and retain workers. That's a staggering number. Also, if you look at, I was actually driving from Rochester, New York here yesterday, and I passed Syracuse, so the Lockheed Martin plant, there's a big sign across it, we're hiring. I passed another tractor-trailer truck that said we're hiring on the side of it. I can't remember what manufacturing company it was. But the point is, today there's 500,000 manufacturing jobs that are going unfilled because of the skills gap shortage in labor. And Deloitte actually estimates that number is going to grow to 2.4 million jobs that are going to go unfilled in the next 6 to 7 years. So that's a massive problem. And certainly augmented reality plays a role in that space, helping training and instruction using augmented reality and assisted reality and mixed reality overlays to help train workers on jobs that they're performing, remote expert support, using AR to have remote specialists that are subject matter experts do live collaboration with technicians in the field, and then everything from complex and simple assembly to quality assurance and safety and equipment maintenance. The problem, though, and when we started Augmented, we looked at this and we talked to a lot of enterprise companies, it's not being adopted. And it's not being adopted because it's not translating to the human worker. And why is that? So when we looked at the problem, we realized augmented reality is missing an ingredient, and that's the AI side of it. So if we look at what is augmented reality combined with artificial intelligence, again, we call it augmented intelligence, but it's taken artificial intelligence to augment the human workforce. And why does AI matter? Because in manufacturing and in industry, you have folks like Jim, who's forgotten more about how to do their job than most people will ever learn, and they're leaving. And then you have people like Jane, who has the attitude and the aptitude, but not the skill set. And so a lot of companies were focusing on augmented reality as a one-size-fits-all solution, and that level of personalization exists in the manufacturing world. All those workers are different, and augmented reality alone isn't sufficient to support this problem. And so this brings us to the rise of what we're calling the augmented worker. And what is that? That's providing each worker with exactly what they need, when they need it, what they need, and how they need it. So it's a combination of a multitude of resources, assisted reality, augmented reality, mixed reality experiences that are available to those workers, personalized in the way where that guidance through AI is delivered to them to provide what they need appropriate for that particular worker. And then taking advantage of AI to augment the human experts that might be collaborating with those workers in the field or on the shop floor. And when we looked at this, one of the things that we recognized was the level of personalization that's required in delivering experiences down to these frontline workers is critical. It's critical to them performing quality and standard and efficiency that's expected of these organizations. And so now I want to talk through a couple use cases that really give examples of large, medium, and small industrial businesses that are using artificial intelligence combined with augmented reality to help transform their workforce. First example is a company called Holtcat. So Holtcat is the largest Caterpillar dealer in the US. They operate out of dozens of counties in Texas today. They have, they sell, they remanufacture and refurbish and service Caterpillar equipment. They have remanufacturing facilities with technicians that are in there, and their responsibility is to bring in equipment that's down or failing, inspect it, do a quality check on it, do any sort of remanufacturing or service that needs to happen, do a quality check again, and ship that back out into the field. Their technicians were operating off of information that was either in their heads or on pieces of paper. And so for Holtcat, one of the things was standardizing on those work instructions, standardizing how the jobs were supposed to be performed, but also understanding how those workers were performing their jobs. Where were they struggling? What steps were they struggling with? What steps were they doing a great job? And one of the things that Holtcat certainly and a lot of other companies that are trying to use artificial intelligence in this space, one of the things that they always mention to us right off the bat is we don't have the data about how these workers are performing their job, so we don't know what to improve. We don't know if it's in the work instructions, in the documentation. We don't know if it's in a process. So we can't fix what we can't see. And so it's taking that black box, someone that's performing a job, taking that and gathering and capturing data on how those workers are performing it and using that to deliver more intelligent guidance to them. Another example is Biochem Fluidics. So they're a mid-sized manufacturing company based out of New Jersey. So they make these small pumps and valves that go in larger medical instrumentation. And their problem is they have 20% of their workforce is temporary labor. And so training and skilling those technicians to perform the job most effectively is a critical need for them. And again, they started off a lot of quality standardization concerns within that environment, certainly in the medical space. They started off a lot of paper-based work instructions. They wanted to not only digitize what they were doing, but use AI as a way to intelligently train these technicians to perform the job at the time they need to perform it versus sitting in a classroom for weeks or months on end. And so what Biochem was able to do is reduce their training time down from 3 months down to 2 weeks for new technicians. And that's a huge cost savings for them when that large majority of their business is based on technicians that they need to train on a continual basis. We call that instant skilling. It's sort of like the Matrix, Neo, and Trinity when they needed to commandeer the helicopter, and the operator, I forget his name, Tank maybe is who it was. So he basically downloaded the instructions on how to fly this helicopter to Trinity, and so it was instant skilling. at the time of need. She wouldn't have known that beforehand, that she needed to be trained in flying that helicopter. So sitting in a classroom 2 weeks prior to that would not have helped her in that situation. So how do we use artificial intelligence to instantly skill these workers at the time of need is impactful, and it's certainly impacting how Biochem is performing their operation. And the last example I want to give here is a company called StrongArm. So if you've ever been in a hospital bed or behind the scenes at an industrial plant or a fast food place, you might notice that there's a monitor with a swivel or arm-mounted arm on it. So StrongArm makes those workstations, both the StrongArm part of it as well as the workstation itself. These are very complex assembly procedures. It goes through a lot of quality checks and inspection after the assembly process. And they had a situation where, again, they wanted to digitize their assembly and QC processes, but also they had an aging workforce. And actually, after they implemented Augmented, one of their most senior technicians who had the most information about assembling their most complex workstation, he retired. And with him, he left all of his tribal knowledge that certainly wasn't documented on any shareable format. And so what they were able to do is bring in a junior technician, perform the same assembly tasks, the same quality assurance and inspection tasks on their equipment by delivering them intelligently guided work instructions, and then the AI engine was able to determine at what point can we further optimize these instructions, at what point has that technician become proficient enough where we can further optimize these instructions. And what that's resulted for them is a 37% improvement in cycle time for how they assemble these pieces of equipment, and obviously much cheaper from a resource standpoint because they're using a more junior technician. So 3 examples of how augmented reality combined with artificial intelligence are used to shape the future of manufacturing and solve some of these real problems that are existing in terms of the skills gap, the labor shortage, and the job market that exists in manufacturing today. Thank you very much for your time. Again, Chris Kuntz from Augmented.